we've got Michigan State versus Western Michigan, North Dakota versus Michigan. So we've got some great matchups. I think the marquee matchup everybody's going to focus on is North Dakota, Michigan, because you got two of the biggest programs, lots of top prospects in that game. But Michigan State has really been one of the great stories of this season. The resurgence of Michigan State, first time we've seen them back in the tournament in quite some years. Adam Nightingale has really done a tremendous job there. They have a superstar freshman, Artem Levshinov. They've gotten big contributions from their transfers. They get a great goaltending performance from Trey Augustine. They win both the regular season and playoff title in the Big Ten. I mean, Adam Nightingale, Coach of the Year in the Big Ten, probably one of the maybe National Coach of the Year, the way things are going. It's been amazing to watch the Spartans this season. What have you thought when you've watched them?
I thought, yeah, I mean, they're really dynamic up front, obviously, and on the back end. Augustine's been great. The one thing I think that they did a really good job of, though, too, was identifying the transfers that could help them not only on the ice, but kind of in the room, too. And I look at a guy like Reed Lebster, who won a national championship at UMass, and Jared DeMichael coached him there. He knows a lot about a guy like that. That's where they, I think, and this term is overused, and I hesitate to even use it, but that's where they kind of went in and changed the culture of Michigan State hockey, was by bringing in some of those guys that have won, some of those guys that have led, get some of that. It wears on you, right? If you're a fourth or fifth year player and you've been at Michigan State and you've never had a winning season, it could be hard to get that thing pushed in the right direction just from a mentality standpoint. They went out and brought in some guys that have won. They brought in some guys that have, I think, were a little desperate to win. A guy like Red Savage, who hasn't had a lot of success at Miami, and I think was looking for a chance to come in and be on a winner, and was a little desperate to do so. And I think playing with that desperation, when you bring in a guy who's a really good player who's played on a weaker program, you know, he has a little bit of a desperation to his game, which helps you kind of push that mentality forward. So they were really strategic in who they targeted. I think the guys they targeted were really good in the portal, and then, you know, from a recruiting standpoint, they've hit a couple of home runs for sure. Augustine maybe being the biggest one, but Levshinov not that far behind.
Yeah, I mean, getting Levshinov was a late commit last year. He's number 2 on my midseason draft list, and I don't think that there's going to be a ton of movement there. He's outproduced Owen Power in his freshman season by a considerable margin. He outproduced him in the USHL as well. I just think that he plays the game like it's easy. Like, it looks easy to him. He barely looks like he's breaking a sweat out there. It's fascinating to watch, but they're going to have, by being the number 4, the fourth of the top seeds, they have the toughest first round matchup. They've got Western Michigan, which is a team that plays in the NCHC that's constantly getting beat up by a lot of good teams. Western has kind of stumbled a little bit more recently. They've only won 3 of their last 9, I believe, or 3 of their last 8. So that is, that is certainly not the way you want to come into the tournament. But this is going to be a team that has a lot of, talent. They have experience. They have transfers. They got Sam Colangelo out of Northeastern. They got Alex Bump, who was supposed to go to Vermont, ends up coming late in the process. Luke Granger has 47 points to lead that team this year. Dylan Went, a legitimate NCAA or NHL free agent. And then really maybe one of the biggest surprises, although his numbers have come back to earth a little bit, was the play of Cameron Rowe in net, who has been a bit of an inconsistent goalie throughout his career, but he's played every single minute a goalie has played for Western Michigan. He's played him this year. He has a .905 save percentage, which is a little bit, which is an improvement for him. So, I mean, congrats to Michigan State for the great season. This is going to be a tough one. You better come ready to play against this Western Michigan team.
Yeah, I have Western graded as the best of the 4 seeds, which is they should, right? But I have them graded as, in the top half of the bracket. If you, just looking again, you take the records out of it against those top 15 teams, you look at it and go, they're 6-8. Okay, well, that's a sub 500 record. There's other teams that are above 500 against those teams. But you just look at their data within those games, plus 12 goal differential, almost plus 100 shot differential, and this is in 14 games. So some people don't like this number, but plus 13 in expected goals. Like, you look at the numbers by themselves and you go, wow, this team's probably 14 games. You look at those numbers, I would have guessed they were 9-5, let's say, against the top 15 teams. And you look at the record, it's actually 6-8. But I think it just goes to show you how well they performed in those games. When they're winning, they're winning by considerable margins, and when they're losing, they're not losing by a lot, which means they're a tough team to play against, because It as it should be. They are the toughest of the fours. I wouldn't be necessary. I have Michigan State coming out here, but I wouldn't be necessarily surprised at all if Western comes out of this game, maybe even comes out of this bracket if Rowe plays to his potential. That's really what it hinges on for me. Rowe needs to be at his best, as most of these goaltenders do. That's a common theme. But they grade out in terms of how they've played this year as a team that is as strong as some of the two seeds, in my opinion, in terms of how they've played.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, it's an incredibly well-coached team as well. I think Pat Ferschweiler is probably one of the best coaches in college hockey, especially, they don't have as many recruiting advantages. Jason Herter is, one of the best recruiters in the country, but they don't have, beyond having a talented recruiter, you don't have as a ton of, facilities advantages. You don't have certain things. But, they basically sell, hey, you come play in the tough conference here, you're going to get better. And they every year have guys that are college free agents for a reason. But, that's going to be a fascinating matchup. I can't wait for that one. But I think a lot of, the casual college hockey fans are going to see Michigan versus North Dakota. And they're going to say, sign me up. I want to watch all of that. And it will be fun. I'm going to start with North Dakota because I think, this is a team that had struggled for a couple of years and was kind of, it didn't feel like the North Dakota of old. And I think maybe the temperature was rising on the hot seat a little bit for Brad Berry because the standards are so high in Grand Forks. And even as a national championship winning coach, you've got some pressure. Well, they've gotten some great performances this year. I think, Ludwig Persson, who transferred out of Miami, has been good. He's been a little inconsistent in net down the stretch, but Jackson Blake has been a Hobey Baker candidate. I think before Will Smith went off, I would have probably had Jackson Blake in my Hobey hat trick. I don't know if that'll necessarily be true going forward, but he's got a point and a half per game, 59 points, 21 goals. They also have, a talented senior in Reese Gaber, who I just love to watch play hockey. I think that he plays such a great game. They got a better than expected performance out of some of their freshman defensemen, especially Jake Livanavage, who's been a highly productive defenseman for them. I mean, this team just has depth and they beat you. They can beat you. They're not the traditional North Dakota beat you up team. They just they're just going to compete with you, and they're going to have enough skill and speed to put the pressure on. So, but clearly, I mean, having a guy like Jackson Blake that can take the game over has to help. So, I just wonder your thoughts on North Dakota. I mean, they're back. They're absolutely back.
Yeah, they're back and they're deep too. I really like their depth. I think,
Yes.
like you said, Blake can take over a game. There's no question about it. But Berg also has 20 goals. You mentioned Gaber; he's almost at 20 goals himself. Even further down the depth chart, guys in their middle six. Perron's got over 10 goals. Johannes has over 10 goals. They've got a lot of guys where that scoring has come from. It's come from the back end too. Like they can attack you in a number of ways. Which makes them really, really dangerous. And then on their back, I mean, I really like their back end, though. I think that's where it kind of starts. Livanavage is one that you mentioned. I think Garrett Pike's had a really good year for them. They're really experienced on that back end, too. Even some of the guys that aren't putting up a ton of points, a guy like Logan Britt, a guy like Keaton Pearson. I mean, they got so much experience back there. It reminds me a little bit of some of those teams that they had back in the mid 2000s that were really experienced on the back end, and not only could they score, but they could shut you down too. They've got a decor that I think is really good with their sticks in terms of shutting down plays, which makes life a little bit easier on their goaltenders. And when that situation's a little bit of in flux at the moment, Ludwig Pearson was hurt. It sounds
Yeah.
like he might be able to play this weekend. I don't think we know yet. I don't think anything's come out, but you're dealing with kind of a situation in flux there at the goaltending position with an injury to the guy who's been the primary starter. Hobie Hedquist has played fine when he's been in, but Pearson's been the primary starter. I think you lean a lot on that decor this weekend to try to shut down plays.
Yeah, absolutely. And another guy that really has been a great defender for them is Bennett Smolik, who transferred out of Bemidji
Yeah.
State, and just he's made he blocks tons of shots. He's plays big minutes. He's going to get the toughest matchups, and that's what Michigan is going to have to contend with. And this Michigan team, they've been at times incredibly frustrating to watch, but they are incredibly fun to watch as well because they are extremely skilled, extremely talented. Goaltending has been an issue for them this year. They're 21-14-3. They were basically 500 in the Big Ten this year. But they have the Big Ten Player of the Year in Gavin Brindley, 51 points this year. Incredibly, Rucker McGroarty with 52 points despite missing 4 games this season, or 5 games this season. 0.58 points per game. Seamus Casey, one of the most productive defensemen in the country, in 45 points. I mean, they have 5 guys with 40 or more points, and Frank Nazar is right knocking on the door there. But then really, Jake Barshevsky has been, the guy that has been their starting goaltender. He's got a .907 save percentage. They defend okay. I just wonder, I think this is a tough matchup for them against a North Dakota team, as you mentioned, that defends so well. But sometimes Michigan can outscore their problems. Do you think they can do it again here, or what are the odds?
I think a lot falls on the goaltender. I think a lot falls on Barshevsky and whether or not, he plays the way and again, it's been so hot and cold over the course of the year. Really struggled at the beginning of the year, has played better, sort of in the middle, but it hasn't been real consistent. I don't think he's really had a run this year where you're like, okay, he looks like he's settled in as kind of a true number one. Maybe, middle of January, right after the break. But aside from that, it's been hot or cold. There's been nights where he's made 40 saves or close to 40 saves. I think I could think back to a series against Penn State, shut out Notre Dame. And then there's been nights where, at Minnesota, he gave up 5 goals on 18 shots in 2 periods and got pulled. So there just hasn't been a lot of consistency there. You don't really know what you're going to get. If the guy that shut out Notre Dame shows up, they'll be fine. I think because they do have the horses that can outscore teams. There's no question about it. If there's some struggle there, you're going to rely on guys like Brindley and McGroarty and Casey and Hughes and Duke and Nazar to outscore North Dakota, which can be tough. Like I said, in what we talked about earlier, with how good their decor is, it can be tough to find space in the middle of the ice. I know they're skilled, but North Dakota is not going to give those guys a lot of time and space to operate. I don't know that there's anybody really in the Big Ten who plays defensively the way that North Dakota is going to play them this weekend. So that's going to be the thing. If Barshevsky can play his part and keep it to 3 goals or less, I think it's 3 goals or less. If they can keep it 3 goals or less, Michigan, even against that North Dakota decor, should be able to find a way to score 3 or 4. I mean, they're that talented. They scored 160 goals this year. Anything more than 3, you're getting into a shootout, and that can get a little tough,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be interesting. And I mean, just to think that Michigan was basically on the bubble for a while and then played their way off the bubble, that gives them some motivation coming in. They lost in a tough Big Ten championship game to Michigan State, but boy, that is going to be fun to watch.